Deanna, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for taking the time.
Thanks. It's so great to join you today.
What's it been, like 15 years since the last time we talked? It's been a while.
Yeah, literally 15 years. I was a young chicken back then.
I think we were all better looking and younger back then. So Deanna and I worked at Concur together a while ago. And so we've had some different journeys, and we were just kind of catching up on old times. And so I appreciate you having the opportunity to kind of talk with us today. So why don't we start a little bit about what are you doing today, and then how did you get there?
Yeah, so after I left Concur 15 years ago, I had a couple stops in the corporate world and then ultimately landed on starting my own company called GrowthMode Marketing. And it's a B2B marketing agency. We've evolved a bit over the last 10 years. More recently, we've really narrowed down our audience to focus, because when you're going out there, and this applies to any type of company that you're starting up, right? When you try to be everything to everyone, and there's a lot of competition in the market, it's hard to really stand out. And so we actually narrowed down specifically to SaaS, and more specifically from a marketing approach to HR technology. So today we help companies in the HR technology space, and some companies in a few other spaces too, but to basically build brand awareness, credibility, and trust in the market to build that demand for their products to help them grow.
So this kind of resonates with us. I think, one of the things that we talked about is just kind of niching down. Like when you build your product, they want to go after an entire market. Really what you got to do is find that segmentation early. So maybe talk to me a little bit about just the specifics and the nuances about HR and SaaS. Like how can you provide differential value there, and why that place? So, and the details aren't as important as the thought process to getting there, because I think that's what's applicable to any startup that's going through this process.
Yeah, so HR technology is actually a great example, because there are 21,000 different types of HR technology, right?
Wow.
Very crowded market. And having marketed in a few different arenas, what I've found is there's two departments that tend to get hit up by sales reps more than any other. First is IT, second is HR, finance is probably third, right? So you are getting hit up a lot if you're in those positions by sales reps. And when you've got 21,000 technologies and you've got a finite budget, you're getting called on a lot, right? And everybody kind of blends in. Well, in the HR technology space, a lot of those technologies are built to scale. And I would say this is true for any SaaS company out there, right? Like you're building it to scale. So in HR tech, typically these technologies, they can support companies that have 50 employees. They can support companies that have 50,000 employees. And they're industry agnostic, right? Yeah. So when they're going out in their marketing and there's 55 categories of product within that, like there's 7 main ones and 55 sub. And that doesn't include all the ones that everybody that's trying to differentiate make up as their own product category. So it's this crazy market, and everybody's going there and they're talking high level pain points. And what's happening from a buyer perspective is they sound like everybody, and when you're trying to resonate with everybody, you
resonate with nobody.
Right. So, I've had so many conversations with founders and CEOs and marketing leaders at these HR technology companies, and even doing my own podcast that was focused on that industry, where I'm like, every time I ask them what differentiates them, and they're like, this is what truly makes us unique, they all sound the same, even when they're technically in a different product category, right? So it's like, okay, this is not working. It's clearly broken. This is why these smaller companies that don't have as big of a marketing budget are getting lost in the crowd, and they're struggling to hit the revenue targets. And that creates a lot of pressure for those that are in charge, right? The founders, the CEOs, the marketing leaders,
salespeople.
Right. They're freaking out, and you've got the investors breathing down their necks saying, you promised growth, where is it, right? And so what I've found in taking a step back and really digging in with these companies is you actually need to narrow down your audience to get traction in the market. And it sounds counterintuitive, because quite frankly, if I can go market to 20,000 companies, why are you telling me to go market to 2,500 companies, right? But the reality is your message isn't resonating, and you've got to find a way to break through that clutter, especially when there's no true meaningful differentiation, at least in the eyes of the buyer. Because a lot of these technologies, at least in the HR tech space, work very similar. And think about it. We used to work in expense management, right? At the end of the day, tracking your receipts and your travel and all those things is not drastically different from company to company, right? But Concur found a way to stand out. They are a great case study of how to do it right, because the leaders believed in investing in marketing and sales heavily to help build that brand awareness. But so many companies don't. And so, if you start looking at how to narrow down the audience, and I always use like the example of like an HR leader at a manufacturing company. If I'm coming in with my HR tech, let's say it's a human capital management platform, and I'm talking about the high level things like we help you hire faster, we help you create this great culture, we help create employee efficiency, all those things that are high level pain points for my organization. But 10 other companies are saying the same thing. You're not standing out in the crowd, right? Now they're buying based on price, they're buying based on reputation, they're buying based on the relationship they form with that sales rep. If you're at a disadvantage for any of those,
You're not going to get it.
Right? Yeah. So now let's say one company comes in and they're like, hey, we understand how hard it is to be an HR leader in manufacturing because you've got some unique needs. You've got administrative staff and factory floor staff, and they butt heads because they feel like they don't get treated equally. The office staff get to work remote, they get these perks. The factory floor staff feels like, what do we get in comparison to that, right? So there's that headbutting. Oh, and you've got to hire for third shift, which is darn near impossible to find people for.
In today's day and age.
Quite frankly, if you can't do that, that impacts the revenue of the company because we've got to be able to operate 24/7 to support the client need to bring in that money, right? Oh, and you've got OSHA requirements, you've got high turnover, the list goes on and on, all these things that are unique to working in a manufacturing industry. Let me tell you how our human capital management solution helps achieve the outcomes that you're trying to get to, right? Like now out of those 10 conversations that you've had with vendors might be the exact same type of product, but which one do you think resonates with that HR leader?
Sure.
Right?
More specific, the better.
Right. And so that's when we talk about niching down what we mean. And quite frankly, when I talk to leaders, especially founders about this, there is a knee-jerk reaction of we can't box ourselves in. Why would we want to narrow on a specific segment of the market when our product was built to work with everyone? In fact, we've got a client base that shows us we can be successful in each of those. And I get it. I'm a business owner. I had to make that decision myself. And you have the things running through your head like, what if this turns away other opportunities? What if this is going too narrow? All of the thoughts about what the risk could be are going to run through that leader's head, right? But at the end of the day, if you can hyper-focus your marketing messaging, not only is it more cost effective, quite frankly, to market to a smaller segment than to try to break through to everybody, but it also means you can hyper-target that messaging so it actually resonates with them. And when it resonates, you start to get traction. So I truly believe when you're smaller, the key to growth is narrowing down that audience and focusing.
Focus. So there's so much in there, Deanna, to kind of unpack. I think one of them is being okay. Like, don't go so generic that like everybody just agrees with you. Basically, get to the specifics so somebody disagrees with you, and then it's binary. Either they're in or out. I think the second piece to it is, which I think is like, do you want a wide sales funnel or do you want a narrow sales funnel? right? A wide sales funnel, you got a ton of stuff, but if like a lot of it isn't real and you're spending money on all of those opportunities and nothing really drops out, that's not very good. What you'd rather have is a narrower funnel that actually is each one of those, you have a very good chance of moving down and into a sales cycle and then basically having a good chance of closing them. And so I think you're right. There's a lot of counterintuitiveness in that, but I think if you want to start strong, you have to find this beachhead, you have to find this niche. And then the other part that like you kind of maybe almost glossed over is there's a lot of context to knowing your customer and knowing those nuances, right? And so the more of those use cases and examples that you can provide that resonate with them, that maybe the larger audience it doesn't, the more traction you're going to get. You're speaking their language. And right, we could say this is probably happens in HR, this could be in finance. They all have a specific vernacular and a set of requirements or use cases that they deal with that they're looking for. This is a pain point in my life. And if you can articulate and understand that, I'm listening.
Exactly. And I think as you start to get wins in that category, you start to be able to show real examples out in the world, right? And as a startup, I think one of the biggest challenges, if they don't know you exist, they are not going to buy from you, period. Like it's a showstopper. At the end of the day, like the hardest time in a business is when nobody knows you exist and you're trying to convince them like we've got something that is worth investing in, right? And I think as you start to add names in, it builds that credibility for your organization, and you can go back and say, well, we actually work with X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like,
I know them.
They're in my industry. They got it.
Yeah.
I mean, even in marketing where they're technically competitors, I can tell you that's powerful to be like, well, we work with these big guys over here. And it's like, well, if they trust you, then maybe I should trust you because clearly you understand the needs that we have today.
So that's good. Let's go back though to like, I don't have a product. I'm in development today. And I've got kind of this issue where it's like, I don't want to really start talking about the product until I got it delivered. And, like basically, and then I'm going to jump to sales, right? And so I guess one of the things that we really advocate to is talking about like each one of these founders has found a problem that they want to change the world on, right? It's not the world, it's just their portion of it.
Right.
And so talk to me about like even like thought leadership, about what sort of marketing can you start to do to basically get it ready for, I'm going to have a product in 3-4 months. I've spent a lot of time and energy on that, making sure that it looks good, its usability, the beta test has gone well. And so like, help me understand from a founder perspective, what are some of the activities that they could do, taking some of the kind of lessons that you've learned?
Yeah, I literally just had this conversation last week with a CEO and his team at a startup that we're working with, who they've been working on developing their product for 5 years. Oof. We started talking about marketing 2 years ago, and the product wasn't ready. We can't market. And the conversation we had last week, because they're like, okay, we literally just launched. We promised 500 units, sold by the end of the year. How are we going to do it? And I'm like, the best time to start marketing was 2 years ago when we started talking about it. The second best time is to start today,
now.
Meaning you can't delay it, because what happens when you delay it until you're ready to sell it is you're already behind the 8 ball, because now the investors are breathing down your neck and you're panicking because you've just spent a lot of money. And I think there's this misconception that if we build it, they will come. And we've got this amazing new software or widget. We put it in front of people, they get excited, they're going to buy. And it rarely ever works that way, right? And so I think what founders need to really think about is, because it takes time to build that brand awareness, credibility, and trust in the market, you really do want to start 1 to 2 years before you officially launch. Because it's the best problem you could have is a waiting list of people that want it as it launches, right? And that fear that if we start marketing now and everybody wants it and we're not ready, that's going to be an issue. I think very few companies have that issue as much as they would like to. But when it comes to what you can do, I think it's going out and starting to talk to analysts about your product and, putting the buzz in their ear so that they start to talk about your product. putting out content, really going out and understanding your market and narrowing down to that ideal customer profile, and then creating content, in the beginning, it's top of funnel content. You're not trying to convince them to buy yet, but you are trying to convince them that you're a company worth following. And in a perfect world, like the way that I look at it, because according to Gartner research, B2B buyers are making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're willing to talk to a sales rep. On top of that, 72% would prefer not to talk to a sales rep at all.
At all, yeah.
And it takes now 66 touches from a marketing standpoint to even build that brand awareness. So the odds are against you. This is not an overnight silver bullet. Like, we're going to turn on marketing and the sales are just going to happen, right? Like, all of these statistics show that it takes time to build up that brand awareness. And, let's not forget about the fact that when the economy's good, maybe 5% of companies in your total addressable market are actually in market to buy right now. The other 95 are not. But if they're making up to 80% of that purchase decision before they're going to talk to a sales rep, they've got their short list by the time they raise their hand and say, I'm interested, right? And if you're not on it, good luck getting on it. And so you think about that, it could be a 1 to 2 year process of branding and staying in front of them and building that credibility and that trust before they're ready to buy. And so if you approach marketing, I think with the perspective that we're going to market to them now just to build that brand awareness, to get them excited about it, even though we're not ready, because what you want is that they know you, they like you, and they actually have it in mind that they want to buy from you when they are in market.
This is interesting, and I guess I'd maybe just run a parallel play to what we've been doing at Wildfire Labs. So we've been 3 years into this process, and I started doing content marketing, right? I write a Substack twice a week. I do the podcast every other week, LinkedIn, notes, whatever it happens to be. I thought that would be the top of the funnel. And what it really has been, which the process is maybe not what I initially thought. It's basically in the mid funnel. So essentially what we do is we have more people that are basically referring founders to us. And that's the entry point. And what they then do is go look at all of our content and say, do these guys have any credibility at all? Do they know what the hell they're talking about? And so it's just been kind of interesting how it's almost reversed. And so more of our demand funnel is these referrals and partnerships at the top that then lead to people inquiring about our content and gauging whether you have credibility to do it, and then basically converting into people that put in applications. And so I think maybe that's non-traditional for, like we're a weird type of little niche, but a lot of B2B, maybe that isn't it. But I think like everybody's got their own demand funnel that they have to kind of figure out. And then what are the tools and where is the best place to reach these people, right? LinkedIn has been really good for us. And I think probably B2B, that's really the case. But it's also, with all the tools and stuff out there, it's a lot easier today to build lists of qualified companies that you can really subdivide. The other part that you brought in that I think is underappreciated is if 5% of your addressable market is actually in the market, there's usually a reason to buy. There's like, even within that, there's a cycle of when they're going to buy. And so I think once you really subdivide that and realize, okay, if they want to buy here, how far back do I need to really start to engage? And this goes back to, well, maybe it's a year before you're even ready to buy and they're getting into the buying season.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think you bring up a really good point that I talk to my clients about all the time, which are those pain points, right? I have found like in the technology space, founders are so proud of what they've built. And, you look at the messaging and it's very focused on features and functionality. Like our tech can do this and this, especially if you throw AI in, right? And all of the messaging builds around that. But the reality is, from a buyer perspective, they're not thinking about it in that way. And so I think a way to really resonate with your messaging and to build out that content strategy is to map out, once you've defined who that ideal customer profile is and defined it really well, so it can't be broad, but what are the pain points that they have that are relevant to your product or solution that you're selling? and mapping all of those out and then bridging the gap between what that prospect is thinking about, which is, I have a pain point, I need to get to this outcome. And talking about your technology in a way that bridges that gap to help them see you help them achieve the outcomes. And that seems like really basic, like marketing 101, right? But I will say 90% of companies miss doing that. And so their content isn't compelling enough because people are thinking in problems. They don't care how you do it. They care that you help them achieve the outcomes.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think the discipline isn't there. And I think it even goes down into the sales cycle, right? I think we see so many founders that throw up on prospects on, look at all the features and if you could do this, you could do that. But what they don't do is good discovery, right? They don't go back and say, which one of these pain points do you have? And if we could solve them, does it actually do what you want? And so then running through each one of them and almost gauging, is this more important than that one, right? And then saying, okay, well, tell me the emotional toll on this. Is it lost revenue? Is it you looking bad, right? You're trying to get them anchored on what's the problem that it actually emotionally solves for them. And then basically doing a custom demo based on those pain points only. Right? Like,
Right.
They don't need to see the kitchen sink because they're like, yeah, that's a lot of functionality, but I only needed really one problem to be solved. But if that one problem is what you told them to be solved, it's really interesting to them. And so I do think this discipline that you're talking about starts in marketing, but it goes all the way through the sales process.
Absolutely. I think as a company, you have to be able to figure out like what is your message positioning and then teach everyone in the company who has, prospecting customer facing roles to talk that way. Because I found like a lot of companies when they're founded and they build a technology and they go out to market, 5 years passes and they've never actually done a formal message positioning strategy. And it's like, well, that's kind of the foundation. Yes, you have to have a really good product and be able to show that it works out in the market, but you have to be able to talk about it to get people excited and interested and realize like this solves the problems that they have, right? And
So tell me more about that. Like what is in that messaging positioning document, and like how would like an early startup actually go build something like that, and be really proactive about it?
Yeah. So I will tell you because over the last 10 years, I've done a lot of message positioning work that I've learned some things along the way. Because we've gone into organizations where we did this big exercise and workshops and we got information from them and we went out to the market and we talked to them and we'd get to the end of the process and we'd look at it and they'd be like, I don't know that we sound any different than anybody else. And the reality, it was like, you're right, you don't, because the inputs that you gave us, we literally interviewed your whole team. We literally interviewed the market, right? And at the end of the day, sometimes a product is just not different in a way that is meaningful to a buyer. So it doesn't sound like unique, right? And so we actually like created what we call a unique point of view framework, specifically for these situations where you're launching a product, it already exists. Let's say it's an AI note taker, right? There is no lack of AI note taker software solutions out there. They all essentially do the same thing. So how do you stand out, right? And with this unique point of view framework, what we do is we focus in on the pain points for that ideal customer profile. And we start to pull out, like, let's talk about your product. Let's talk about the problems. What are the things, if you were at an industry event and you're talking with colleagues, that you guys could talk about and debate all night over a glass of your favorite beverage, right? And trying to pull those insights in, but then figuring out how to take that and looking at it from the perspective of the buyer, like, how are they thinking about these problems? What are the obstacles? What are the consequences of those issues that they're having, right? And mapping all of that out. And then as that next step, taking the product or the solution that you're selling and mapping that back to the problems that they have. So what that does is it's not, I say it's not message positioning, but it really is, because it's making people hyper focus on talking about problems and the outcomes and how you get them there versus talking about feature and functionality of the technology and taking that. And it's pretty amazing to see the difference when you start to talk in the language of your ideal customer profile, how much more like emotionally resonant that content becomes, because now we've got this blueprint of your unique point of view along with your ideal customer profile that you're using along the way, like every time you create a new piece of content to say, is this targeted to our ideal customer profile? Is this talking about the things that they genuinely care about? And are we talking about their pain points? Are we talking about the outcomes, right? Like it's this guide to map against to say, is our content hitting the mark here? And then you put it out there and you start to build on all of that content, because repetition is key. Getting in front of them constantly is key to being successful. But as long as you continue that and keep doing it and leaning in where you find things are resonating, it just continues to build that credibility and trust. And this is not an overnight thing. As much as a marketer, I sure wish it was, and as business founders, I know that they wish that was the truth. But if you're building brand awareness, I always tell companies when they start to build that demand generation engine to expect it to take 6 to 18 months to really get predictable traction in the market, to start getting those inbound leads and those hand raisers. And that's scary to people, but that's the reality. Rome wasn't built in a day, neither is brand awareness. And if you're coming in with zero brand awareness, realistically, it's probably closer to 18 months. And that doesn't mean...
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, that doesn't mean you don't have any sales in 18 months.
Right.
It just means to get to the optimal point where you have kind of a level of predictability in the incoming leads.
Yeah, and I guess there was some things inferred in there that I think is good. I think one of them is you got to add value, right? Like, I mean, you really have to be, even if I don't buy from you, why am I participating in an email campaign, looking at your LinkedIn, whatever it happens to be? And I think it goes back to some of the stuff that I guess I learned in Challenger Sales, right? Like if you can basically give them content that makes them better at their job or makes them think, like that's interesting, right? And so having an opinion, I think a lot of the stuff on the thought leadership is kind of interesting in this category. The second piece that I think you inferred is it's an iterative process where you have a hypothesis, what worked, what didn't. And I think the more times you listen to your client, you try something, you pivot to it, you try this again, and then all of a sudden it starts to get closer and closer. And all of a sudden, 70, 80% of the time, it actually resonates. And you're not going to ever get to 100%, but I think it's that idea of let's put a stake in the ground, let's try the messaging, what worked, what didn't, and then continue to iterate as you go. And even when you finally get close to that, when you feel good, the market can change and you have to go do it again, right? Like whether it's COVID or it's something else, AI, like I think the way that these things get positioned needs evolution over time. It's not static.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to have your ear to the ground always. And I think one of the mistakes that organizations work at or make at any size is they do all the strategic work, they define their ideal customer profile, they map out the pain points, they start creating content, and then they just kind of run with it, right? And it's like, meanwhile, the market is changing, things happen, like AI comes out. Okay, great, everyone's leaning into AI. Now suddenly, at least in the HR tech space, all kinds of lawsuits are coming out because, now they're saying there's bias in AI and you're using it to hire, and I didn't get, my resume didn't get selected, all these crazy things, right? If you're not listening to that and adjusting the message to know like, hey, guess what? HR leaders now have a fear of buying a technology with AI, which we leaned really heavily into. If you don't make those adjustments to address their fears, like you're missing the mark. So even when you find something, to your point, Todd, that really resonates, it's not going to resonate forever because eventually the market dynamics are going to change. And that doesn't necessarily mean the product is changing drastically, but the pain points that the buyer is focused on are going to evolve and change. And you've got to be able to be responsive to that. Now, I say that with caution, because I've also seen where it's like you put the messaging out and they go and they talk to, 3 different buyers or one investor, and they hear something and they get really reactive and they're like, we got to change this because we just heard this. Like, you have to have a big enough market
Sample
size
size.
conversation to know what a trend is. It can't
Yeah.
be reactive to 1-2 conversations, which is really hard when you're smaller because you're not having conversations at the scale of, a really large organization.
So let's maybe bring it back to something that we both know in Concur. I thought, you talked about this in the opening, that they were a company that invested in sales and marketing. I would even say they were a sales-led company, right? Like, as a guy who was in product for a long time, I think we are a sales-led company. And I think, those guys sold the future a little bit, right? And so, we went from, like, when I was there, it was like, it was actually CDs, right? Like, we went from CDs to a client server environment to a cloud environment, from T&E to integrated travel and expense, right? And so we had a bunch of these pivots that we basically said, we see the future, we're going to sell into the future, and we're going to be unapologetic, right? If you want the same old, we're not your people. So automatically they're kind of saying, okay, we're gonna make this a smaller funnel because those are the people we want to go after. But what it ended up doing was positioning as a person that said, the guts of how to do expense reporting probably aren't that different, but I want to be with a partner that basically is thinking around the corner, that's thinking about platform, that's thinking about integrating third parties internationally, all these other things. And so they bought basically, in some cases, on our future, not necessarily on kind of what we're doing. So let me just stop there and see, like, did I miss anything in some of the key elements that they had from the way they thought about it? But it's a good kind of example of a lot of the things you've been talking about and what you and I experienced over, our times at Concur.
Yeah, I think Concur, they did a lot of things right, from product to sales to marketing, and all the pieces that came together. When I came into Concur, they were probably about 500 employees at that point, and I was there for a couple of years where they grew probably 4 times what they were when I started. One of the takeaways that I had from working there that I saw that they did that was different from anywhere else I had worked or have worked since, and all the companies that I've worked with since starting GrowthMode Marketing, is the investment level that they made between sales and marketing. So they were reinvesting 40% of revenue back into sales and marketing. And I feel like you say they were sales led. I think they were sales and marketing led because they were
totally
doing
yeah.
From a marketing standpoint that a lot of companies the size that they were at that time would not have done from an investment level. They were really attuned to, we have to build that market awareness out there and build that credibility and trust. Because I think there are organizations, and this happens a lot of times in startup, they're like, before we start marketing, we're going to hire a sales team. And, we need to increase revenue. Let's hire more salespeople, right? Well, in the beginning, you win by pure determination and grit, right? Because you're having conversations one at a time. It's not scalable if you just invest in sales, right? And so that marketing piece plays into it. And I have seen many situations where there are companies that have really great brand awareness and mediocre sales reps do really well there. And I have seen star sales reps who are very skilled sellers go into these startup organizations or, mid-size organizations where there isn't this investment in marketing and really struggle. And it's like there's got to be a connection, right? Because if your mediocre to average sales rep can excel over here, but your exceptional sales rep flounders over here, from a marketing perspective, if you step back and think about it, it's a hell of a lot easier to sell when you've already got that trust in the market and they know who you are and they've got it in mind. I want to work with you. And I think any of us that have bought technology for a business can probably attest to the fact that sometimes you go into that conversation already knowing that it's 90% likely you're going to purchase. and the sales rep is mediocre and they fumble over things, and you still buy, right? Because you knew that was the technology you wanted. The missed opportunity for those smaller organizations where they don't have that brand awareness yet, it's like, if you don't have that exceptional sales rep and that support, it'll be a lot harder to hit that growth,
Yeah. So like, somebody that's just starting out though, like how do you think about like you're on a budget, right? Like most of our companies, maybe they got $100,000 or something like that to kind of start their company. And that goes from everything from their salary to the office space, to the marketing, to the development, to go to market. And so I guess maybe even just be like creative on, I think there's so many tools out there that you could do that are for free, that are just your time, that basically start to like, if you have your ideas well put and you understand the customer and you understand the pain points, I think there's a lot of things that they can start to do to really market to an audience that warms them up to either a beta or to buying, soon after they actually ship their product. So like take it down a little bit and say, like, what are the steps like tactically they could go do to like really implement some of this in a way that like gives them good behaviors, right? And good foundational elements, but doesn't spend a lot of money. But as they get more traction, realizing they have to invest more to keep that flywheel moving.
Yeah. The struggle is real in the beginning because it's like you need the money to be able to invest in the marketing to build that brand awareness, right? But to get investors and to prove yourself in the market, like you don't have the money, you got to figure it out, right? And it becomes that chicken before the egg or egg before the chicken, right? I think, when you're looking at things from the beginning and you do have that limited funding, you got to kind of map out, okay, what are the things that we can do that might be scrappy, but start to build that brand awareness? And the number one thing to look at is, where are your ideal customer profile type of companies hanging out? And who's already built an audience that you can tap into? Yeah. So yes, you can do things like post on LinkedIn. You can, get an email application for pretty cheap, like marketing automation, and start sending out emails. You've got to go build that list, do those things. You can start to do all of that stuff for pretty scrappy. But the key is to show up in those conversations in any way that you can. And so I don't think there's a silver bullet. I mean, LinkedIn, you mentioned that, I've mentioned that. It's a great example for B2B, but only if your audience is hanging out there, right? It's worthless if your audience is not hanging out there. And so it all comes back to really understanding where they are and how you can tap into those things. And then kind of prioritizing stuff to say, okay, I can't boil the ocean today. I've got a cup's worth of budget that I can work with here. What can we do to get the most bang for our buck with the budget that we have, and prioritizing things that way? And then as you start to get traction, to build up on that, and a question I get all the time from a marketing standpoint is, well, how much money should we be investing? Yeah. Right. And it's hard because it's different for every company, because quite frankly, 10% over here is a much different budget than 10% up here, right? Yeah. But I actually just did some research on this for one of my clients who is pre-revenue. And there were several investment firms and like SaaS startup organizations that the information was pulled from. And essentially it was to do lean marketing in the beginning, where you're just testing things to see what resonates and really focusing on the messaging to get it right. You should do 10 to 15% of that seed funding. So if you had $1 million, right, you do the math. Okay, you should be spending $100,000 to $150,000 on your marketing in that first 12 to 18 months when you have that funding. If you're going to do a balanced approach, it would be 15 to 20%. So 150,000 to 200,000 if you had $1 million in seed funding. And then if you were going aggressive, which you would do if you wanted to, make a splash in the market, grow faster, then you're looking at that 25 to 30% as an investment.
And that's like headcount, tools, campaigns, everything all in.
Right. Everything it costs to do your marketing. So, even when you're like, well, it's free to do this and this and this, it's never free, right?
Yes, it's your time.
As a founder, your time matters. And it's like, okay, if you value your time at $150 an hour, 200, whatever the case would be, does it make sense for you to do this? Does it make sense for you to hire someone to do it? Because there's a cost any way you look at it.
So let's kind of go back to a couple of examples. So in college, I didn't have a lot of money. It took me forever to get through school. And so I started a company that was doing geographical information systems. So it's called GIS. It's like a software tool. But in the early days, they had these like just forums, and people could basically post questions. So for basically a year that I was going to school and I had money, I basically answered 1 or 2 questions every single day. And I didn't like wing it. I basically said, hey, if I can't answer this with credibility, I'm not going to do it. But what I ended up doing was I kept track of every single one of those that I did. And then basically when I didn't have money, I basically went out to those people and I basically said, hey, I have a semester that I'm free. Do you have a project in this area? You had all this credibility. And then I had so much work. Like basically that was what I ended up doing all the way through the end of work, or all the way through the end of school, was picking up these jobs for the people that I had done. Same thing. I mean, we're seeing people that are basically getting into forums like Reddit, as an example, and just answering questions, building personal connection. Or if somebody's active on LinkedIn, basically just follow them, then comment on their stuff, then try to get a connection with them. And then if they are part of the demographics that you want to do, you've got a way better chance of getting some time with them. So just thinking through that, and that's all free. That's time, but it's not like a ton of money. And so if you have this list of people that you think would be good prospects for your ICP, then go figure out where they're active and then go start building that relationship, because it's the first 25. That's all we're talking about. First 25 customers. How do you get there? And so it may be a little bush league. It may be a little guerrilla. But at the bottom of this is it's building credibility and building value for that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, the credibility is a big thing. I've heard of a lot of, people that they find Slack groups, for example, and they're constantly going in there and just being active, and you're not actively pushing or selling anything.
No.
Same with LinkedIn, same with Reddit, like all of these forums where people go to find information or to ask questions. If you just consistently show up, and it's the right audience, and you're putting meaningful thought into how you're responding to things and truly adding value to the community, over time, it's like you're building credibility up with them, right? And it does, like I see it with LinkedIn. I post stuff, and occasionally someone will pop into my DMs that's like, this one message you had really resonated. Let's have a conversation. Or they'll say, I've been following you for a while. I really like the way you think. It's all about building that credibility and showing the topic. You have, a smart approach. You're sharing information and content freely with them. And over time, you didn't even know it, right? That you're selling to them. But it goes back to that, I know you, I like you, I have it in mind, I want to work with you.
Yep. And you're adding value, right? You're adding value unsolicited.
Yeah.
So maybe let's kind of pivot to the last piece of this, which is, this is all good. I think that people look at AI as an easy button. And I think that if you take all the concepts that we've just talked about for the last 40 minutes and you apply AI, there's a way to kind of thread this where you're using AI as a tool to accelerate and help you. But if you do not get the content right, then you're building something that's just a me too. There's not a lot of meat on it. There's not differentiation, and there's not a lot of value. And so I see everybody kind of saying, I can do this on social media. I'm like 10 times more effective. But at the end of the day, if you're really producing a bunch of crap that's just like everybody else, you're never going to get there. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about how you can take this deep domain expertise and all the nuance you've talked about, and then layer on AI as a tool that could be an accelerator, but not to the detriment of degrading quality.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, because I think on the surface, it seems easy, like, oh, I'll just dump this into ChatGPT, right? Anybody who's ever played around with it, the first few times you use it, like I remember a year and a half ago, I had people telling me, oh, AI is amazing. I'm getting great stuff from it. And my team and I would go in there, and every time we're like, I don't get it, it's garbage coming out, right? But we kept playing with it, we kept fine tuning it, and now it's like our best friend
Yeah.
because we've figured out how to use it exactly how you're talking about, where it's not just spitting out stuff that's not impactful, right? And I think the key, if you're going to use AI to help you create content, is to first like build out a custom GPT, and you have to have content to put into it. And I think that's where a lot of organizations struggle with it. It's like if you're starting out and you haven't done your message positioning, you haven't developed an ideal customer profile, you haven't really like put together the foundational package of your strategy, good luck, right? Getting it to work for you. But if you can take those things, like let's say you have a really well-defined ideal customer profile, I can tell you, when we do a full-blown one for an organization, they're like 15 pages long. There's a lot of detail that goes into it, from the pain points that they think about, what their buying process is, where they hang out, like all the things you would want to know, right? And then we do that unique point of view framework. That also tends to be 15 to 20 pages of content to put in there. You put that in, and we've done this with some of our more established clients, like their company's more established, so they have a lot of product content, and build that GPT that way. Then if you know how to prompt well, which that's a skill in and of itself, to learn how to ask the right things to get what you want. Like sometimes we're blown away by the quality of what comes out there, and it helps shape things. So the things that I would build into it: buyer personas, ideal customer profiles, message positioning, product information, like all of those
Vernacular, like
strategy.
what
Yeah.
words do they use? Like that's another one that we do.
Yeah.
Give me a list of like a handful of customers that you think are in that ICP, and so that they have not only the profile, but they actually have customers they can look up. I think that's good.
Yep. And the free version is great to an extent, but you
Yeah,
have to have a paid version to
like
make
I
it
don't think you do
palatable.
this with a free version, in my opinion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, I think there is a way to use it, but I would also caution, like, don't just take what it spits out. Like, this is your reputation. It's got to have human oversight. Like, you've got to look at it and figure out, like, is everything it puts in there fact?
Accurate.
Because
Yeah.
it comes up with statistics sometimes, and you're like, this statistic is amazing. It really makes my point. What was your source? And ChatGPT will actually come back and say, well, I actually made this up because it really, supported your story.
cause. Yeah.
Well, crap, that.
Yeah.
I don't want to lose credibility out there because I'm putting these random untrue facts out there, right? Like now you're just making stuff up. So you really have to look at it from that lens, but also from the lens, like, does this sound like original content from my company, or does this sound like AI? Is it saying things that are true to what we do and, kind of positions in the voice that we're looking for, or is it coming across as generic? Like you have to look at all those things.
Yeah, but I think like you can do that too by just including writing samples. Like you can do a style guide. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do to basically put in your custom GPT that basically says, here's content and here's how we want it written. That really, and it does a pretty good job of staying on that. If it's unique enough. So I think those are all really good pieces. I think that essentially what you're doing is you're building training wheels for how it's supposed to think and what it's supposed to go do, and then basically if you can drop in good content, then
Right.
it can work well. But I think you have to put a bunch of infrastructure in place and rails to make sure that you're getting what you want out of it by far.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Like I have a client, we worked with him, kind of on a consulting basis to build out his ideal customer profile and his unique point of view and then his marketing strategy. From there, he went, and he's pretty good, with AI, and he built out a chat GPT, and now he's posting content on LinkedIn. And I know because I was behind the scenes how he's doing it, because he's got a small, scrappy team. And as the CEO, founder, he's the marketer at this point, right?
Yep.
He's putting really good, really focused content out there, and he's getting really good engagement. So yes, to your point, Todd, if you have the right things built in there and you know how to do good prompting, you can get pretty good stuff. I always say you can get it 80 to 90% there. Sometimes things come out and you're like, this is perfect. I only have to change 3 words. And,
Right.
Sometimes you have to take a little bit of a deeper dive into it or keep prompting
Yeah.
until you get what you want. Or I find all the time I start over because I'm like, this GPT today is not understanding what I'm asking. I just need to start fresh, right?
Yep.
And ask it in a different way to get where I need to go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's a process. But I do think it's a tool that basically is an accelerator. I think we look at it, at least, starting a company, like it's so much easier than it was, just 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Whether it's on the coding side, whether it's on the customer discovery side, whether it's evaluating your competitors or differentiation, all of those things have just gotten so much easier in this. And so, we have a 6-month program, and it's just really made that a lot easier to kind of get through if you do the right steps. And like you said, it's not an easy button. You have to engage your brain. You have to have some domain expertise. You have to be able to understand when it's hallucinating. But it is an accelerator that you can use to really move your business forward. And we're starting to see companies that, are 5, 10 people, and they're competing with companies that are 100 people, right? Because they're kind of AI first in a lot of their infrastructure, not just the marketing side, but a lot of the manual tasks that they have to do behind the scenes. And so, that's exciting.
Yeah, it is pretty cool, and obviously, like from my perspective, we look at AI from a marketing perspective, but there is so much more you can apply it to, like the coding and, all the different processes you have internally. And I think it's going to be commonplace to start to see these companies that grow to 25 million, 50 million, 100 million with much smaller staffs
Yes.
than previously, which, if you're one of those companies, that's exciting because guess what? That means more revenue, that goes
per head.
back into the company or the owner's pocket. Right.
Yep.
Right. And, you can accomplish the same things that in the past took 40 marketers and 50 sales reps and, 12 product managers and, all the different roles.
Yeah, I just think it's going to take some time to shake out, right? I think there's early adopters that are doing some of it. Product's not very good from this perspective right now. But I think if you're really thinking about it, technology first, we've got like an infrastructure that we're helping founders basically automate as much as possible, right? So that you do that from the very beginning. You expose them to the tools. You get them saying, where is your best value? You can't have 50 number one priorities. You have to have 1 or 2, and then you have to basically automate some of this other stuff that you go do. And so, if they're getting the value of being 4 or 5 times as big as they are because they're doing that, like to your point, it's going to lead to some incredible competitive opportunities for them over time, which is great.
Yeah, for sure. And when you think about the end game, if the end game is to eventually be acquired, right, there are different reasons why companies will buy you. And one of those reasons, I think, in the future will become your AI processes that you've built out.
I totally agree. Yeah. Well, let's leave it there, Deanna. I really appreciate you taking the time to kind of share your knowledge and experience. I think there's like a lot of lessons learned here that people can apply. And so I appreciate it. If somebody wanted to get a hold of you or follow you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so you can look at my company website, which is growthmodemarketing.com, or check me out on LinkedIn, Deanna Shimota. I actually post a lot of different things about marketing in the SaaS space that are, relevant to founders in the space as well, because we talk about a lot of the challenges that companies face from the beginning up to, even moving through that we see, because we have the privilege of talking to a lot of leaders and marketers within the SaaS space and, can see kind of the challenges and the wins that they have. And we love to share that stuff.
Well, that's good. I would encourage people to do that. I think that's where we kind of got reconnected. I saw some of the stuff you were doing. I really thought it resonated for our audience. And so that's what precipitated this conversation. So not a sale, Deanna, but an opportunity to talk and reconnect. And so I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to catch up.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for listening to Startup Stories from the Treehouse. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you found our conversation helpful, leave a review. It really helps other founders discover our show. For more insight and episode summaries, don't forget to subscribe to the Wildfire Labs Substack. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more stories with you next time.